All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are unpacking the absolute mechanical brilliance, the tragic lore, and the mythic inspirations behind what is arguably Dark Souls' most iconic duo. We're talking about Knight Artorias the Abyss Walker and his loyal companion, the Great Grey Wolf Sif. Now, I want you to just think back for a second to the very first time you stepped into the Ulusol Colosseum. The eerie silence, that sudden violent entrance of a totally corrupted knight. And then just the sheer adrenaline-fueled panic of trying to survive against an opponent who seemed to break literally all the rules. These characters, they aren't just mere obstacles in a video game. They are an absolute masterclass in how interactive media can seamlessly blend intense combat design with devastating, heart-wrenching storytelling. So let's really dive into this. How exactly does a game use its combat design to make you eventually mourn the very boss you're actively trying to defeat? I mean, it's a pretty remarkable feat, right? To transition a player from feeling this pure, sweat-inducing survival instinct into a state of profound empathy. To pull that off, the developers had to make the fight feel incredibly intimate and deliberate. It isn't just about hacking away at a giant health bar. It's about forcing you, the player, to engage in this deadly dance where, step by step, you slowly begin to actually understand the creature that's trying to destroy you. Well, to really get the Abyss Walker, we first have to talk about his masterclass combat design, specifically focusing on this concept of readability. Now, readability is basically the design principle of using clearly communicated attack telegraphs so that when you overcome a difficult obstacle, it feels satisfying and, above all, completely fair. Because despite his monstrous, chaotic appearance, Artorias is meticulously designed to ensure you never feel cheated by the game's mechanics. He tests your observation, your spatial awareness, your reaction times, setting the stage for what makes his tragedy so palpable. You don't just fight Artorias, you actually learn his language through the combat itself. You can actually see this in action if you look at how this builds into his physical attacks. He utilizes these massive telegraphs that follow a very deliberate, almost musical rhythm. First, he drags that massive sword into position, sparks flying off the stone, which makes it incredibly easy to track with your eye. Then, say he leaps into the air, he hangs there almost like he's posing for a comic book cover, and he noticeably slows down his arm right at the apex of the jump, just before punctuating the strike. To put that into perspective, the average human reaction time is around a quarter of a second, but Artorias, he gives you generous telegraphs that last almost a full second. You can trace his movements well ahead of time. It literally gives you time to dread the impact for sure, but also ample time to actually react. And the thing that makes this fight truly dynamic is how he seamlessly cycles between two distinct AI states. In his high aggression state, he unleashes this relentless deluge of attacks that will completely shatter your guard and drain your stamina if you're relying too heavily on your shield. But then, he switches. He paces. He observes you. And if you succumb to panic and attempt to chug an Estus flask during this reactive phase, oh man, his AI is specifically baked to punish you severely. He cleverly manages your spacing, ensuring you are taking massive risks if you try to heal. It basically demands that you treat him not as some random, unthinking monster, but as a brilliant, calculating knight who is constantly analyzing your weaknesses. But here is where the mechanics bleed directly into the narrative. Artorias fights you with his right hand. Meanwhile, his left arm is just dangling there as a shattered, wobbly husk. His dragging sword and his labored, puppet-like animations transition us from pure game mechanics right into brilliant environmental storytelling. Because if you look at the wider game lore, it tells us Artorias was renowned across the land specifically as a left-handed swordsman. So that sluggish, deranged flailing we experience in combat, it isn't just to make his attacks readable for us. It tells us he is a totally broken shell of his former glory, and his lifeless arm is grim evidence that he's being puppeted by an outside corrupting force. And this brilliantly illustrates his tragic fall from grace. His descent is mirrored in the dual nature of the greatsword you can forge from his soul later on. You can either craft the true greatsword, which is this blessed weapon dealing divine and magic damage that perfectly represents his original holy mission as a Knight of Gwyn, or you can craft the cursed greatsword, tainted entirely by the void, completely stripped of its divine light, but uniquely capable of striking ethereal ghosts. The sword itself literally walks the line between light and shadow. It serves as a physical, wieldable monument to a mission that ended in total failure. The tragedy of this corrupted knight is deepened even more by some haunting cut dialogue. Originally, the developers recorded vocal lines for Artorias where he screams in sheer throat-tearing agony, "Forgive me, for I have availed you nothing." Now, even though this was ultimately removed from the final release to make him feel more beastly and fully consumed by the darkness, this dialogue reveals the absolute horror of his shattering mind. He wasn't just a mindless beast, you know? He was fully, consciously aware of his failure as the abyss consumed him entirely. So what's the hidden reason why his arm is actually broken in the first place? Well, he sacrificed his sole defense, his magical great shield, just to save his loyal wolf companion, the baby Sif, from the dark void. It stands to reason that, without his shield, Artorias desperately tried to block the crushing, physical weight of the abyss with his dominant left arm, basically shattering every single bone in it in the process. He gave up his power, his sanity, and his mission, all just to protect the innocent creature that accompanied him into the dark. This revelation makes your eventual encounter with the Great Grey Wolf just utterly heartbreaking. Sif isn't a villain. Sif fights you purely out of duty to protect Artorias' grave and to stop you from meeting the same dark fate as his master. As the fight drags on and Sif's health gets critical, the wolf actually begins to visibly limp in pain, swinging that massive sword with noticeable, agonizing fatigue. The boss music isn't some triumphant orchestral track. It's unusually subdued. It acts like a sorrowful dirge. And honestly, worst of all, if you complete the DLC first and save the young Sif from the abyss, the older Sif will recognize your scent in the present day. He'll howl in this tragic, heart-wrenching recognition before reluctantly picking up the sword to fight you anyway. Elevating this emotional narrative even further is how deeply rooted it all is in Norse mythology, connecting these digital characters straight to ancient, epic legends. For instance, Sif shares a name with the Norse goddess of the earth. The massive wolf wielding a sword heavily parallels Fenrir, the great lupine son of Loki, whose breaking of chains signals the end of the world. The greatsword of Artorias totally mirrors legendary mythological weapons, and the wider game universe is just dripping with Norse concepts, like world trees akin to Yggdrasil and warrior afterlives mirroring Valhalla. From Software masterfully borrows from this mythology to create an atmosphere of inevitable doom. It anchors their tragedy in a mythic, timeless tradition where even the absolute greatest heroes are just destined to fall. But, the story doesn't actually end with their defeats. His legacy endures way after his death. The undead legion of Farron partook in wolf blood specifically to emulate Artorias and cleanse the abyss across generations, and they are overseen by the dormant old wolf of Farron. The sleeping, emaciated wolf serves as an ongoing homage, or maybe even a direct reincarnation of Sif's eternal vigil. Just like Sif faithfully protected Artorias' grave, the old wolf commands watchdogs to fiercely defend the sanctity of the sleeping abyss watchers. It keeps the flame of that tragic loyalty burning ages after the original heroes have turned to dust. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. If you actually succeed in stopping the abyss, but to do so, you have to destroy the corrupted, noble heroes who first held it back, what exactly have you saved? The tale of Artorias and Sif is a brilliant execution of storytelling through mechanics. It shows us that sometimes a Pyrrhic victory in a ruined world is just as devastating as a total defeat. Take that thought with you, and maybe look a little more closely at the monsters you encounter the next time you dive into Lordran.